In the outskirts of a small Philippine fishing town, a boy named Arnel lived a life most would consider unbearable, but to him, it was simply survival. His mornings began before sunrise, helping his widowed mother set up a small wooden cart by the roadside where they sold bananas, mangoes, and coconuts to passers-by. His hands, though young, were already calloused from carrying crates, and his shirt bore patches his mother had carefully sewn in place. Yet, despite the weariness of his body, Arnel's spirit carried something extraordinary, a voice that could silence the world. His father, who had once been a fisherman and an amateur guitarist, had passed away when Arnel was just 9. The only thing left of him was an old, battered guitar with one broken string and a half-functioning radio that often crackled with static. On nights when their house shook with the sound of heavy rains, Arnel would sing to comfort his mother. His favorite song was Hotel California, a tune his father used to play and hum along with. Though the boy didn't fully understand its lyrics, he felt the melody seep into his soul, filling the emptiness left by loss and poverty. Arnel often performed for neighbors who gathered around their small home. Children would sit cross-legged on the dirt floor, wide-eyed as his voice rose and fell with emotion. Adults would shake their heads in disbelief, whispering, "That boy is destined for something greater." Still, greatness seemed impossible when you could barely afford rice for dinner. One afternoon, as Arnel practiced under a mango tree, his mother watched with silent tears. She knew her son carried something rare, something the world needed to hear. Against all odds, she filled out an application for an international talent competition, scribbling their details on paper smudged with her hard-working hands. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Arnel had been accepted for an audition. When he held the letter, his hands trembled. The idea of traveling to a foreign land, standing before strangers, and singing a song his father once played, it was overwhelming. But when he looked at his mother's tired smile and remembered the promise he once made to himself, that music would be his escape, Arnel whispered, "Mama, I will do this. Not for me, but for us. For Papa too." That night, under the glow of a flickering oil lamp, a dream began to burn brighter than poverty. The day of the audition arrived faster than Arnel had ever imagined. For the first time in his life, he boarded a plane, clutching his father's old guitar so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Every sound and sight overwhelmed him, the airport lights, the bustling city, the sea of strangers speaking languages he barely understood. Yet, as he stepped into the grand auditorium, it wasn't the foreign world around him that made his knees shake, it was the stage itself. Backstage, contestants practiced, some with powerful voices that made him doubt his own. He wore his cleanest shirt, though it was still faded, and the same patched shoes he wore at home. When his name was finally called, his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. The curtains parted, and the bright stage lights blinded him momentarily. The massive audience stared, curious about the shy boy standing alone with a beaten guitar. The judges, famous, intimidating figures, leaned forward, sizing him up. One whispered to another, just loud enough for the cameras to catch, "He looks so small. Is he ready for this?" Another raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by his appearance. The crowd murmured too, some skeptical, others simply indifferent. A microphone stood before him like a challenge. His voice cracked slightly as he introduced himself, "My name is Arnel. I come from the Philippines. Today, I will sing Hotel California." At that, a wave of surprise rippled through the room. Gasps, even chuckles, followed. One judge smirked and muttered, "That's one of the hardest songs ever written." The weight of doubt pressed down on him like a storm cloud. But Arnel closed his eyes. In that instant, the noise faded, and he saw his mother's face. He remembered the mango tree, the smell of sea salt in the air, and his father's voice singing along with the radio. With trembling hands, he strummed the first chords, his fingers pressing down on the worn strings. The crowd fell silent. The boy who had seemed so fragile suddenly carried himself with a presence far larger than his body. His voice, though raw, carried power and truth. He wasn't just singing a song, he was telling a story. And within moments, every person in the auditorium leaned in, realizing they were about to witness something unforgettable. The first few notes spilled into the auditorium, and a hush swept across the crowd like a sudden wind. What had moments ago been a sea of skepticism was now frozen in quiet awe. Arnel's voice, though young and unrefined, carried a haunting depth. Each word of Hotel California rolled out not as a copy of the original but as if he were breathing his own life into the lyrics. He sang slowly at first, letting every note linger. His voice cracked in places, but instead of weakness, it carried raw emotion, the kind that told a story no judge's critique could ever measure. When he reached the line, "Such a lovely place," his tone lifted, his face glowing with a hope he had carried all his life. Some audience members clasped their hands together, whispering, "Oh my God," under their breath. By the time he hit the chorus, the entire room was captivated. His voice soared above the rafters, steady and powerful now, as though his father's spirit was guiding him from beyond. The crowd that had once doubted him began to sway, clapping softly in rhythm. A woman in the front row wiped tears from her cheeks. One of the judges leaned forward, her lips trembling as she whispered to the others, this is something else." Every strum of the guitar carried the weight of his struggles, selling fruit in the scorching sun, singing under the stars to comfort his grieving mother, dreaming beyond the limits of poverty. And every lyric carried hope, hope that he could rise above, hope that his voice could carry him somewhere no one from his world had ever been. As the song reached its climax, Arnel closed his eyes tighter, pushing his soul into every note. His body shook with emotion, his fingers pressing the strings until they nearly bled. The final verse came out like a prayer, echoing through the arena with a purity that no microphone could distort. When the last chord faded, silence followed. For a long, powerful second, the entire theater sat in stunned stillness. And then, like a wave breaking, the crowd exploded into cheers, whistles, and thunderous applause. Strangers stood on their feet, tears streaming, chanting his name, Arnel. 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 That night, in a single performance, a poor Filipino boy transformed into a global voice. The ovation thundered across the theater, echoing long after Arnel had sung his last note. The boy, overwhelmed, lowered his guitar and looked around in disbelief. His chest heaved as if he had just run a race, and tears welled in his eyes. He couldn't believe the same crowd that had doubted him was now cheering his name with such passion. The judges, usually so composed, struggled to contain themselves. One wiped her tears openly, her voice cracking as she spoke, "I don't think I've ever heard this song sung with so much soul. You didn't just perform, Arnel, you lived it. Every note, every word, was your truth." Another judge, usually the harshest, slammed his hand on the desk, startling everyone. He pointed at Arnel and declared, "That was not a performance. That was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. You're the reason this show exists." The boy stood frozen, clutching the guitar to his chest, as if afraid this moment would vanish like a dream. His eyes darted to the audience, then to the judges, then backstage where his mother stood with her hands over her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably. The third judge leaned in, her voice trembling, "Arnel, when you walked on this stage, I thought you were just a shy kid with a guitar. But the moment you began, you transformed this entire room. You made us feel your pain, your hope, your love. That is something money cannot buy, and talent alone cannot create. That is pure heart." Then, in a moment no one expected, two judges exchanged a glance, nodding silently. Together, they both raised their hands and slammed the golden buzzer. The sound echoed like thunder, and in an instant, golden confetti burst from the ceiling, raining down in sparkling streams. The crowd roared louder than ever, chanting his name, stomping their feet, some even crying along with him. Arnel fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands as the golden rain covered him. Backstage, his mother collapsed into the arms of the host, whispering through sobs, my son has made it." For Arnel, this was more than a victory. It was proof that even a poor boy from a small town could stand on the world's grandest stage and make it his own. As the golden confetti continued to rain down, Arnel slowly stood, his face wet with tears, his small hands trembling as they clutched his father's guitar. The cheers of thousands echoed around him, but in that moment, all he could hear was the steady beat of his own heart and the faint memory of his father's voice humming along to the same song back home. For the first time, he wasn't just a boy from the streets, he was an artist standing in the spotlight of the world. The host rushed on stage, hugging him tightly. "Arnel, do you realize what just happened?" he shouted over the noise. The boy could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. Cameras zoomed in on his tear-streaked face as the judges stood to applaud him, clapping above their heads. One judge leaned into the microphone and declared, "Mark my words, this boy is going to change lives with his music." Backstage, his mother finally joined him on stage, stumbling through the falling confetti. She wrapped her arms around her son, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You did it, Anik. Your papa would be so proud." Arnel hugged her back tightly, whispering, "We don't have to struggle anymore, Mama. This is just the beginning." The crowd cheered louder at the sight of the embrace, moved by the story of a boy who had climbed from poverty to glory in one breathtaking moment. That night, videos of his performance spread across the world within hours. Headlines read, "Poor Filipino boy sings, Hotel California, judges cry, golden buzzer smashed." Millions watched as his voice traveled across oceans, inspiring children who dreamed of something greater and reminding adults of the power of resilience. Arnel returned to his small town as a hero. Neighbors who once heard him sing under the mango tree now saw him on the big screens, his voice celebrated by millions. But he never forgot where he came from. He kept singing for his community, for his mother, and for the father whose old guitar carried him from the roadside to the world stage. That single performance didn't just change Arnel's life, it became a story of hope for anyone who had ever dared to dream despite the weight of the world.